Have you ever thought about this? In Burkina Faso, liquid gold isn't in a mine, it's in the milk of millions of donkeys. On a map of Africa, under the dry sun and dust, these animals once considered slow and worthless are helping revive economies, bringing in billions of dollars. And little-known secret? Those rotten tomatoes from the previous episode are part of their diet. This story isn't just about donkey milk, it's about a leader who refuses to kneel. As African news outlets report this week, President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso has embarked on an economic revolution built not on gold mines but on donkey milk, cultivating millions of these humble animals to spark a multi-million-dollar industry. As one headline puts it, Burkina Faso is raising millions of donkeys, not for show, but for the future. Donkey milk, once overlooked, is now gaining value on the global market, traded almost like liquid gold. The convoy moved slowly through the parched outskirts of Ouagadougou, raising clouds of ochre dust that shimmered in the evening sun. President Ibrahim Traoré sat in the lead vehicle, his gaze fixed on the horizon where lines of humble donkey carts stretched toward the city gates. These were not the ragged caravans of an impoverished nation. These were supply lines organized, purposeful, and guarded by the quiet pride of their owners. Traoré had seen this before in history books. Colonial powers once drained Africa's resources, loading carts and ships with gold, ivory, and cotton, while leaving the people behind in chains of dependency. But today, the cargo was different. Chilled containers of donkey milk destined for high-value buyers in Europe and the Middle East. And yet, this was more than commerce. Each liter represented a step toward breaking the cycle of foreign aid dependency that had crippled Burkina Faso for decades. The profits would rebuild schools without IMF loans, bring electricity to villages without foreign contractors, and equip farmers without imported debt. The president remembered a meeting months earlier in Rome where an Italian minister had offered a partnership to process the milk at a price. The price was sovereignty. He had refused. "We will not send our wealth abroad for others to profit," Traoré had said, his voice calm but unyielding. "We will build here with our own hands. Let Africa's wealth nourish Africa's children first." Those words had earned him more than applause back home. They had drawn a quiet warning from certain foreign envoys. In whispered corridors, they said he was closing the doors of Burkina Faso. But Traoré knew the truth. Real independence required some doors to be shut so that others, built by African hands, could open. Now, as the trucks rolled into a newly built dairy plant on the edge of the capital, constructed entirely with local materials and labor, he felt the gravity of the moment. This was not simply an economic project, it was a declaration. The plant's massive steel doors slid open, revealing a humming interior bathed in soft yellow light. Rows of stainless steel vats lined the floor, each filled with fresh donkey milk, cooling under strict quality controls. Local technicians in crisp white uniforms moved with precision, some barely out of their teens, their education now funded by the very product they were processing. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped inside, greeted by the plant manager, a woman from a small village near Kaya. She had once worked as a street vendor. Now she oversaw production for one of Burkina Faso's fastest-growing industries. Her voice carried both pride and urgency. "Mr. President," she said, "we've met our European order 2 weeks ahead of schedule. But the real breakthrough is here. Our cosmetics line is ready for market." She led him to a glass display of creams, soaps, and serums, all made from donkey milk and infused with local herbs. The labels read, "Burkina Pure, from the heart of Africa." "This," Traoré murmured, "is how we stop selling only raw products and start owning the value chain." Outside, news cameras waited, eager for a statement. But Traoré wasn't thinking about headlines. He was thinking about the villages that would receive their first solar-powered clinic next month, funded entirely by the profits from this plant. He also knew the risks. International dairy conglomerates were already circling, offering lucrative buyouts hidden under layers of cooperation agreements. Accepting would mean quick money, but it would also mean ceding control. And control, once lost, was rarely regained. In his mind, he saw the faces of Burkina Faso's farmers, women leading donkeys to water, children studying under the glow of a single light bulb powered by a generator bought with milk profits. He thought of the dusty roads soon to be paved, the grain silos that would feed families through the lean season, and the quiet but unbreakable dignity in the eyes of his people. "This is only the beginning," he told the plant manager. "From the donkeys of Burkina Faso, we will build an Africa that stands tall." He turned to the cameras. "We are not begging for a future, we are making one." The convoy rolled out of Ouagadougou before sunrise. The horizon was still a deep indigo, and the dust from the lead vehicle curled like smoke under the beams of the headlights. President Ibrahim Traoré sat in the back of a rugged armored SUV, not wearing the tailored suit of a politician, but the loose cotton tunic of a man on the move. His destination, the far northern province of Soum, where the first large-scale donkey breeding cooperative had sprung from the ground like a miracle in the desert. As the sun rose, the land unfolded a mosaic of ochre soil and scrub brush, dotted with clusters of round mud huts. Along the road, men led caravans of donkeys carrying sacks of feed, while women balanced buckets of milk on their heads with the ease of generations. When the convoy arrived, the village erupted into cheers. This was no stage-managed rally. Here, people remembered the days before the program when men left for the cities and women walked 10 kilometers for a jug of water. Now, with the cooperative's income, the village had a well, a grain mill, and a small school with a tin roof that didn't leak when the rains came. Traoré walked among them, shaking hands, listening. A grandmother pressed a small jar of donkey milk cream into his palm. "For your mother," she said with a smile. "Tell her the women of Burkina Faso send their blessing." Under a wide acacia tree, he gathered the cooperative's leaders. They spoke not only of their success, but of the pressures they faced foreign traders, offering double the price if they sold milk outside the national network. It was tempting. The money was real, but so was the risk. "Remember," Traoré told them, his voice steady, "our wealth is not just in what we produce, but in who controls it. Once the chain leaves our hands, we are no longer the masters of our own table." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. The people here knew what it meant to lose control of a resource. They had seen it before: cotton, gold, even their own labor. This time, they would guard the donkeys like they guarded their children. The first sign of trouble didn't come from the villages. It came from the capital's inbox. A letter, stamped with the crest of an international trade consortium, landed on the desk of Burkina Faso's Minister of Agriculture. The language was polite, but the meaning was not. They wanted access. They wanted a quota. They wanted in. Their representatives claimed it was to bring Burkina Faso's donkey milk to global consumers, but Traoré had read enough contracts to know the trap. Once foreign distributors controlled the processing and packaging, the value chain and the profit would slip quietly across borders. Within days, foreign news outlets began running a strange line of stories. Reports suggested donkey herds in Burkina Faso carried unverified diseases. Others claimed the milk market was a bubble that could crash, leaving farmers destitute. None of these reports cited local sources. All of them came from the same handful of think tanks in Europe and North America. In Soum, the villagers heard the rumors and grew anxious. Some whispered that maybe they should sell early, before the bubble burst. Others believed it was just the old colonial playbook, scaring people into surrendering their resources. Traoré moved quickly. He called for an emergency broadcast, speaking directly to the nation from the presidential palace. Behind him, a banner read, "Burkina Faso will not kneel." "Let the world hear me clearly," he said, his gaze fixed on the camera. "Our donkeys are not a curiosity for someone else's table. They are the foundation of our renewal. We will trade with dignity, not dependency. And to those who spread lies, know that the people of Burkina Faso are no longer afraid of the dark. Light. That night, in villages across the country, radios crackled with his words. Men and women sat in silence, then broke into applause. The next morning, farmers in Soum doubled the size of their herds. The message was clear. The fight wasn't just about milk, it was about sovereignty. Weeks later, the air in Ouagadougou was electric. Not with celebration, but with unease. Satellite images leaked online showed convoys of trucks crossing borders into neighboring countries under the cover of night. Each truck carried cages and harnesses. Each truck carried donkeys. The media spun its own tale. Traoré loses grip on national resources. But those close to the president knew better. This was no internal failure. It was a coordinated smuggling operation backed by shadowy intermediaries. Traoré summoned his inner circle to a late-night council. Maps were spread on the table, red pins marking border posts, blue pins marking known smuggling routes. "These aren't just thieves," Traoré said, his voice low. "They are testing our will. They believe Burkina Faso will trade its future for a handful of coins." Intelligence reports confirmed the worst private ranches in 2 neighboring countries were being stocked with Burkina Faso donkeys, destined to bypass the new state-run milk cooperatives. The buyers? A coalition of foreign investors connected to multinational food conglomerates. The scale was staggering. If unchecked, the smuggling could drain the national herd by 30% in less than a year, collapsing the very foundation of the Donkey Milk Initiative. Traoré's response was swift and unapologetic. He mobilized the Garde Républicaine to seal key border points. Patrol units on motorcycles swept rural backroads. In villages, elders were asked to form watch circles to guard the herds, day and night. The president knew the optics would be fierce. International headlines would paint him as authoritarian, even paranoid. But he also knew that sovereignty is never defended in whispers. One night, standing before the gates of a seized smuggling convoy, Traoré told the gathered press, "They will call me a dictator for defending what is ours. Let them. I would rather be cursed for protecting my people than praised for selling them." His words were carried on every radio wave, from the capital to the desert fringe. And somewhere in the dry silence of the Sahel, farmers realized something. The world was watching, but Traoré was not bending. The standoff escalated. By the 3rd week, Burkina Faso's borders had become choke points. On one side, smugglers backed by foreign cash, their trucks idle under the sun. On the other, villages, with nothing more than their bodies and belief, forming human chains to stop the animals from leaving. International pressure mounted. Representatives from a European trade bloc issued a statement accusing Ibrahim Traoré of destabilizing regional commerce. An African Union delegate privately warned him that sanctions were being considered. But Traoré didn't flinch. In the presidential residence, he drafted a televised address not to foreign capitals, but to his people. That night, under the dim glow of kerosene lamps in thousands of villages, the president's face appeared on every screen. "They want our donkeys because they cannot breed sovereignty. They want our milk because they cannot produce dignity. And they want our silence because it costs them nothing. But we will not sell the future of Burkina Faso, not for gold, not for oil, not for 1,000 empty promises." The speech was short, but it cracked something open. Farmers from Niger's borderlands began returning smuggled donkeys to Burkina Faso in quiet defiance of their own authorities. Market women in Ouagadougou pooled money to fund extra fodder for the state herds. And in a move that stunned observers, a coalition of young Burkinabe engineers unveiled a prototype solar-powered pasteurization unit built entirely from local parts, capable of extending donkey milk's shelf life for export. For the first time, the industry no longer needed foreign processing plants. Traoré understood the deeper meaning. This wasn't just an economic project anymore. It had become a symbol, a declaration that even the smallest, humblest resource could become a weapon of independence in the right hands. By month's end, the smuggling routes were dismantled. The foreign investors, silent. The European statement, withdrawn. The African Union, forced to acknowledge Burkina Faso's right to defend its agricultural future. In the dusty streets of Bobo Dioulasso, murals appeared overnight paintings of a donkey drinking from a golden bowl. Beneath the words, "Our strength is not for sale." It was supposed to be the end of the story, Burkina Faso victorious, the donkeys secured, the milk flowing into a homegrown economy. But then, an unexpected message arrived from Beijing. China's Ministry of Agriculture proposed something audacious, a joint African-Asian agricultural sovereignty pact. Under it, Burkina Faso would become the exclusive supplier of donkey milk to a network of over a dozen countries, bypassing the Western-controlled commodity markets entirely. To the foreign investors who had tried to break him, this was a dagger. Suddenly, the same product they had mocked was being positioned as a premium export on a scale that could rewrite trade maps. Ibrahim Traoré moved fast. Within weeks, Chinese technicians were in Ouagadougou not to dictate terms, but to share technology. Solar pasteurizers multiplied across the countryside. A joint veterinary research center broke ground, its mission clear: breed stronger, healthier donkeys to sustain the boom for decades. And then came the twist that left even his allies stunned. Traoré announced that 51% of all profits from donkey milk exports would be placed in a sovereign wealth fund, locked away for education, rural infrastructure, and national health care. In one move, he had not only secured the market, he had weaponized it for the nation's future. Foreign media scrambled to reframe the narrative. What had begun as a curious agricultural experiment was now a case study in how a small African nation had seized control of a global niche market. The balance of power had shifted. And for the first time in modern history, Burkina Faso was not reacting to global events, it was setting them. The West was not prepared for what came next. On the morning of the pact signing, Ibrahim Traoré invited not only African heads of state, but also leaders from the Caribbean and Pacific regions long ignored in African trade policy. Cameras captured the moment, hands clasped across oceans, a map behind them showing new shipping routes that bypassed the old colonial choke points. The symbolism was deliberate. For decades, Burkina Faso had been told it was too small to influence the global economy. Now, it was at the center of a coalition spanning 3 continents. In Washington and Brussels, think tank reports warned of a new, non-aligned economic bloc forming under African leadership. Analysts struggled to understand how donkey milk, once dismissed as a backwater novelty, had become a geopolitical lever. The reality was simple. Traoré had found a resource the West did not control, built the processing infrastructure locally, and secured markets without surrendering sovereignty. In doing so, he had exposed a truth many had forgotten. Africa did not have to beg for relevance. It could create it. When the first cargo shipment left Ouagadougou for Shanghai, the streets filled with people waving not just Burkina Faso's flag, but banners reading, "Our milk, our wealth, our future." Foreign journalists asked if this was the beginning of a new African economic order. Traoré's response was calm, almost understated. "We are not beginning a new order. We are simply remembering who we are." The twist was complete, not just in economics, but in identity. Burkina Faso was no longer the student in the global classroom. It had become the teacher. Years later, the sound of hoofbeats is as common in Burkina Faso as the laughter of children in newly built schoolyards. Roads once choked with dust are now lined with solar-powered streetlights. Clinics in remote villages offer free care, funded entirely by the sovereign wealth generated from donkey milk exports. Foreign debt? Paid off. Rural illiteracy? Cut in half. A nation once called landlocked and hopeless now trains agricultural engineers who travel across Africa, teaching other nations how to turn overlooked resources into national power. And through it all, Ibrahim Traoré remains the same man who once stood in a simple military jacket before a restless people and said, We did not ask for permission to be free, we stood up to win it. Today, Burkina Faso is not just free, it is thriving, independent, and respected. The donkeys graze under the same sun, but the people walk taller, their backs unbowed. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touches your heart, share this story. Subscribe to the channel to continue the journey of an Africa that no longer bows its head. God bless Africa.